Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So here's a new deck profile for you guys today. This time it's on Branded Despia. So I've done Despias in the past before, and that's with the Dogmatica engine. But now that we finally had the structure deck, this deck just got a massive boost, especially with all the new Albaz support cards. So I figured I'd show you guys what I got, and yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So this deck, funny enough, is actually running at 44 cards rather than 40. And the reason for this is simply because of the engines I'm running. So, but again, we'll get to more detail about that as we progress. So starting off with 3 copies of Albaz. This is your main searcher. Can search out any branded spiller trap, including the new branded fusions. So yeah, Albaz is amazing. It also has a graveyard effect where you can basically bring himself back and also negate an opponent's monster's effect. So, or rather, yeah, a monster effect per se. So Albaz is pretty good. Of course, you can only use one effect of Albaz per turn and only once that turn, but honestly, that's pretty good. Next, 2 copies of Tragedy. So Tragedy, basically, if it's sent to the grave or banished by a card effect, you can search out any Despian monster. So you can search out Albaz or your ad libitum, and also has a graveyard effect where you can banish it and reset one of your branded spells or traps. So pretty good way to recur your resources. Of course, same clause, you can only use one effect per turn and only once that turn. Next, I am running the 1 copy of Dramaturge. Some people don't like to run it, some people do. You know, it really depends on preference. I like it because A, it's a 3k body that brings himself back as long as he's used as fusion material, whether sent to the grave or banished. But he also acts as a form of disruption. So if like your opponent summons a fusion, synchro, exceeds, or a link monster, you can target one of those monsters and negate its effects. So pretty good. Next, 1 ad libitum. It also has a revival effect if used as fusion material, and it can also act as a power boost. So ad libitum, definitely something to consider, and I would definitely recommend running it. I know some people like to run comedy as well. I don't personally like it because it is a bit situational, but I don't know. Maybe I could be wrong for all I know. Moving on, 2 copies of Fallen of Albaz. Obviously, since you do need it for the branded fusion card. And the fact that he's a super poly on legs is pretty cool. And it's a dragon type too, so that's what I like about it. My tech option for this deck is 2 copies of Incredible Ecclesia. Some builds run it, some builds don't. Personally, I love it simply because in case if I lose the dice roll, at least I have a card that's really strong going second, because as long as your opponent controls more monsters than you do, she can special summon herself. And also, she can also act as a form of disruption since her ability is a quick effect. You can send this card to the graveyard and then special summon the Fallen of Albaz directly from your deck, and then Fallen of Albaz's effect, super poly one of your opponent's monsters. So yeah, Incredible Ecclesia is something to consider too. If I had 3, I would definitely run 3, but unfortunately I only own 2. So yeah. Next, 1 copy of Light Hexi Fusion. Since I am running Dragoon in my deck, I decided not to go DPE because like I wanted to do both actually, Dragoon and DPE, but there were a few inconsistencies with my strategy, and I decided to pick one over the other, and I think Dragoon is definitely the better card. So yeah. Again, if you want to run the DPE package over the Dragoon package, then yeah, you're pretty much good with one or the other. But again, I wouldn't recommend running both. I am running 2 copies of Edgem Chain since, you know, I am running Fight for Patchwork. And of course, moving on to hand traps, 3 copies of Ash Blossom. Definitely like the most generic hand trap, and you definitely, against the mirror match, you definitely want to aim for that branded fusion, or if, again, depending on the build, Fusion Destiny is another card to consider to hitting too. Also running 2 copies of Ghost Spell, which is also pretty strong in this format, not just against the mirror match, but just a lot of graveyard effects in general. And Ghost Spell, again, is just like, she's pretty flexible this format, surprisingly. 2 copies of Ogre. Ogre is just good in general because, you know, it's spot removal. And also, like, depending on the matchup, this card can be, like, crazy good against Flunderies. You want to hit their field spell. Or if a deck that likes to turbo out Appaloosa for just to push for more combos, if you can force out a negate, you can Ogre it and just prevent it from resolving. So, yeah. Ogre is just amazing in this format. Well, that pretty much rounds out our monsters. Moving on to spells already. Let me just get this out of the way. Alright, for spells, 3 copies of Branded Opening. This is the deck's Rhoda / E-Telly. So basically, it's just a faster way of getting Albaz out to the field. And what's really cool is that the discard is part of the effect, so it's not cost. So if you have a Tragedy in your opening hand, you can just play this, send it off, and then you can get an additional search. And the same thing can go with Edgem Chain. So if you send it off with this effect, you can get Fight for Patchwork right away and just get an additional +1. So yeah, Branded Opening is just an amazing card. 3 copies of Branded Fusion. It's basically shit all fusion, but for Albaz. So basically, it's how you get access to your Libellion, your Albions, whatever you want. And it's also a 1-card Dragoon, so that's pretty funny. 2 Branded in red. It's another way to, you know, recur your resources and also perform a fusion summon. You can actually make Guardian Chimera off of this, so that's really amazing too. 1 Despia Theater the Branded, which also acts as a polymerization card, and it's a field spell too. And it can also revive some of your monsters back too. Alright, so moving on, of course I am running Fight for Patchwork, 3 copies of that, simply because, you know, you search out Edge of Chain and a polymerization, and yeah, it's just a +1, so kind of like a Pot of Greed-esque effect. So honestly, Fight for Patchwork is just amazing. Of course, 2 copies of polymerization to go along with it. 2 Super Poly, because, you know, considering that we do have quite a good number of targets, Super Poly is just absurd. For my deck, I'm actually running 3 copies of Triple T. You don't actually have to run this if you don't want to, because it is a little pricey. So, like, for a budget alternative for those who are looking to play on a more budget scale, Allure Darkness works just as good because, you know, this deck does run a lot of darks. But I like Triple T simply because we are in a format where monster effects activating on your own turn are going to happen. So like a DPE, if you can force it out, you can actually resolve Triple T, draw 2 cards, or just, you know, force Century one of your opponent's cards in hand, or just take control of one of their monsters. And keep in mind, the take control is not targeting, so yeah, it's just so good. So I think Triple T is really good. I've seen some builds like the main deck Crossout Designator. It really depends on what you prefer, really. 1 Called by the Grave, you know, obviously. And for other starters, I got Gold Sark and 1 Foolish Burial. And that pretty much rounds out our main deck. Alright. For the extra deck, it's going to be pretty self-explanatory, honestly. So starting off with, of course, 2 copies of Libellion, requires an Albaz plus 1 Dark Monster. And of course, this basically does the exact same thing as Albion. It shuffles back materials rather than banishing them, but that's still really strong, all things considering. 2 copies of Albion, which you actually use this to make out your Dragoon. So like you play Branded Fusion, send Light Hex Seal Fusion with the Fallen of Albaz, make this Albion's effect, banish the Light Hex Seal Fusion with your Albaz, and you can make Dragoon just like that. 1 Mirror Jade. Some people have been considering running this at 2. I'm considering it to myself too, because its effect is not technically a hard once per turn. It only states that if you use its effect to banish a card, or rather, I believe it is any 1 card, right? Oh no, banish 1 monster. I'm sorry. Where you banish 1 monster on the field as a form of disruption, you can't use it the following turn. But if it leaves the field and then you could resummon it again, you basically reset the entire effect. So yeah, Mirror Jade is actually pretty strong and pretty broken, all things considering. Next, 2 copies of Masquerade. Obviously, you want to just burn your opponent for damage. So yeah, Masquerade is pretty strong and easy to make, all things considering as well. 1 Desperate Coritas. I was considering running a 2nd copy of this as well, but then I realized, like, you don't really make this as often as you do Masquerade. And even though his ability does come up where you basically power down all monsters on the field except level 8 or higher fusion monsters, I feel like considering that this deck's pretty much going to be everywhere, everyone's going to be playing some form of this deck, it might not come up as much anymore. So that was the thing. 1 Perskinian. It's crazy if you can pull it off. Unfortunately, I only own 1 copy of Chimera. I know 2 is generally the standard number, but I think 1 is just as good, honestly. But yeah, I only had time to get 1 copy and couldn't get my hands on a 2nd. But I do have an additional card to run on the, you know, just to fill in the blank, basically. White Titaniclad is just mainly a super poly target because, you know, we are in a form where there's a lot of huge monsters. So Fallen of Albaz plus 1,2500 attack or more monster basically just makes this. And it gets stronger based on how many levels it was. So yeah. So anyway, to fill in the blank for that 2nd Chimera, I am running a Sprin, the Iron Dash Dragon. I feel like this is a card that most people often overlook, mainly because it just requires 1 Albaz plus 1 effect monster that's special summoned this turn, and this can include during your opponent's turn too. So if they special summon a monster and you have a Fallen of Albaz or a way to get to it, you can just basically, yeah, make Sprin, the Iron Dash Dragon. And what's cool about him is that it can change its monster zone, and it can nuke all face-up cards within its column. So yeah, it's basically a Mech Knight, all things considering, and yeah, Sprin is just crazy. So again, don't underestimate this card. It can actually play around a lot of things. So yeah, Sprin, I definitely would recommend trying it out if you want to try it. 1 Starving Venom, 1 Dragos Depilia just for more super poly fodder, and of course 1 Red Ice Dark Dragoon, since that is going to be one of my main ace monsters of the deck. And yeah, pretty cool. All right, now for the side deck. Side deck's going to be a little odd, but it'll make sense as I go along. 3 copies of Token Collector. This basically to combat the Brave Engine as well as the Sword Souls. So yeah, definitely something that I like playing just in general because it's a free body too. So it's always good to have board presence. 3 Nibiru. what's funny enough is that it can basically fuse with any of your Despia monsters, but I kind of feel like this is more of a going second deck, or going second card, I'm sorry, not going second deck. So, yeah, Nibiru can come in clutch, especially against Pring Kids, possibly the Mirror Match as long as they don't have a negation on board. 3 Effect Veiler. This is primarily to pair with Crossout Designator, but also another form of disruption, again, if I'm forced to go second. So, yeah, which by the way, I'm running 3 copies of Crossout Designator. I'm also running 2 Twin Twister and a Harpy's Feather Duster. I might actually cut this for our 3rd Twin Twister simply because I'm not really sure, like, how many more back row heavy decks, because I feel like everyone's going to be leaning towards this deck right now, but I feel like, you know, there's still going to be, like, plenty of back row strategies, so who knows. But anyway, that's all I got. So figured I'd showcase what I had for you guys, and hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will catch you guys again next time.